It was a cold December evening, and snow blanketed the streets outside the lavish mansion where the Carter family lived. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace contrasted with an air of unease. 5-year-old Emma sat on the plush living room carpet, her bright laughter filling the room as she played with her favorite stuffed bunny. Her innocence seemed untouchable until the heavy wooden door creaked open. In walked Thomas Carter, Emma's grandfather, dragging his suitcase across the hardwood floor. His sharp eyes scanned the room, and his commanding presence seemed to silence everything around him. "Emma," his voice boomed. "Come here and greet your grandfather." Emma froze. The stuffed bunny fell from her tiny hands as her eyes darted to her mother, Sophia, who was busy in the kitchen. A sudden chill ran through the room, far colder than the winter storm outside. Sophia rushed in, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to mask the unease in her voice. "Father-in-law, you're here early. Let me take your bag." Thomas waved her off. "I'm not here for pleasantries. Children need discipline. Sophia, not coddling." His gaze turned back to Emma. "Come here." Now, Emma didn't move. Her little body trembled as she clung to the corner of the sofa. "No," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. Sophia's smile faltered, but she quickly crouched down to Emma's level. "Sweetheart, it's okay. Grandpa just wants to say hello." Emma shook her head vigorously, her small hands clutching the fabric of the sofa tighter. "I don't want to," she cried. Thomas took a step forward, his voice growing colder. "This is exactly the kind of behavior I won't tolerate. You've let her run wild. Sophia, a child like this will grow up to be nothing but trouble." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but Lucas, Emma's father, stepped into the room. His calm demeanor barely concealed the tension brewing beneath. "Father, let her be. She's just a child. There's no need for this." Thomas turned to Lucas, his expression hard and unforgiving. "Just a child? That's the same excuse your mother used for you. And look how soft you've turned out." Lucas clenched his fists but said nothing, his eyes darting to Emma, who was now silently sobbing. Sophia gently scooped up her daughter, whispering comforting words as she carried her upstairs. What happens when love and protection collide with tradition and control? What if the very man who once raised you now poses a threat to your own child? This is the story of Emma, her 5-year-old girl whose life took a chilling turn when her grandfather moved in. A story of pain, confrontation, and the power of standing up for what's right. If you've ever wondered how far you would go to protect someone you love, this story will leave you breathless. Stay with us until the end to see how one family confronted their deepest fears. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support more stories like this. Your engagement means the world to us. Thank you. The following morning, the Carter household buzzed with activity. Sophia was preparing breakfast while Lucas read the newspaper. Emma sat at the kitchen table, carefully coloring in her new picture book. For a brief moment, it seemed like a typical family day, until Thomas entered the room. "Emma," he called sharply. The little girl jumped in her seat, her crayon skidding across the page. "Yes, Grandpa," she replied in a small voice. Thomas strode over, his imposing figure towering above her. "You didn't come to say good morning to me. That's bad manners. When I was your age, I'd have been punished for such behavior." Emma looked down, her tiny hands gripping the crayon. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry isn't good enough," Thomas said, his voice cold. He grabbed her arm, pulling her to stand. "You need to learn discipline." "Father." "Stop!" Sophia exclaimed, rushing over. She gently placed her hands on Emma's shoulders, trying to shield her. "She's just a little girl. Let her be." Thomas glared at Sophia. "This is exactly why she behaves this way. You're too soft on her. Children need to be taught respect." Lucas, hearing the commotion, entered the room. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing at his father. Thomas released Emma's arm, but not before leaving red marks where his fingers had gripped her. "I'm doing what you should be doing, teaching her some manners." Lucas clenched his jaw. "Father, We don't parent that way. Times have changed. Thomas scoffed. That's why children today are weak. When you were her age, I didn't hesitate to discipline you. And look how well you turned out. Lucas's fists tightened, but he said nothing, his mind swirling with memories of his own childhood. Later that day, Emma was playing in the living room with her favorite stuffed bunny. She accidentally knocked over a vase, sending shards scattering across the floor. The sound echoed through the house, and Thomas appeared almost immediately. "What have you done?" he thundered, his voice like a whip cracking through the air. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. It was an accident," Emma stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "An accident? That's no excuse," Thomas shouted. "Pick up those pieces now." Sophia, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room. "Emma, don't touch the glass. You'll hurt yourself," she said, kneeling to gather the shards. But Thomas was relentless. "No, she made the mess. She cleans it up. That's how children learn responsibility." "Oh, she's just a child," Sophia protested. Thomas ignored her, grabbing Emma by the wrist. "Get up and clean this." Emma began to cry, her small voice breaking as she said, "I'm scared. Enough of this nonsense." Thomas snapped. He pulled her toward the broken glass, but Lucas intervened, stepping between them. "Let her go, Father," Lucas said firmly. Thomas glared at his son but released Emma. "You're coddling her, just like your mother did you. You'll regret this." That evening, during dinner, Emma accidentally spilled her milk. The glass tipped over, its contents spreading across the tablecloth. Everyone froze, but Thomas reacted instantly. "Enough of this clumsiness," he barked, slamming his hand on the table. "She needs to be taught a lesson." "Father, it's just spilled milk," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Just spilled milk." Thomas shot back. "This is about carelessness, about discipline. She's too old for this nonsense." Thomas turned to Emma. "Stand outside in the snow until you understand the importance of being careful." "What?" "No," Sophia exclaimed, standing up. "She's 5 years old." "Father, that's cruel." "Cruel?" Thomas said, his voice growing colder. "You don't understand what it takes to raise a strong child." Before anyone could stop him, Thomas grabbed Emma by the arm and dragged her toward the back door. The icy wind rushed in as he opened it and pushed her onto the snowy porch. "Stand there until I say you can come back in," he ordered. Emma's cries pierced the air. Sophia rushed to the door, pulling her daughter back inside despite Thomas's protests. "You're going to kill her," Sophia shouted, wrapping Emma in a blanket and holding her close. Thomas glared at Sophia. "You're making her weak. One day, you'll thank me for this." Over the next few days, Emma became increasingly withdrawn. She flinched whenever Thomas was near and refused to leave Sophia's side. At night, she woke up crying, murmuring about her grandfather in her sleep. Sophia tried to talk to Lucas about the situation, but he hesitated. "He's my father, Sophia. He raised me, and I turned out okay." Sophia's eyes filled with frustration. "Did you? Or are you just pretending everything he did to you was normal?" Lucas couldn't answer. His silence was louder than words. But Sophia wasn't willing to stay silent. She began noticing more bruises and red marks on Emma's arms. Something had to change. And when Clara, the family's longtime housekeeper, shared a chilling story about Thomas's treatment of Lucas as a child, Sophia knew she couldn't wait any longer. The next step would uncover the truth hidden for years and set the stage for a confrontation that would shake the Carter family to its core. The days after Thomas's punishment of Emma were filled with tension. Sophia couldn't ignore her daughter's fear any longer. Emma refused to play in the living room, where Thomas spent most of his time, and cried at the slightest sound of his voice. Sophia decided to confide in Clara, the family's longtime housekeeper, hoping for advice. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her weathered hands gripping a cup of tea. Her usually kind eyes looked heavy with concern as Sophia spoke. "Clara, I don't know what to do anymore," Sophia admitted, her voice shaking. "Thomas keeps saying he's teaching Emma discipline, but what I see is..." It's more than that. She's terrified of him. Clara sighed deeply, her gaze dropping to the tea in her hands. I've been with this family for a long time. Mrs. Sophia. I've seen more than I care to remember. What do you mean? Sophia asked, her brows knitting together. Clara hesitated before finally speaking. When Lucas was a boy, Mr. Thomas was strict, far stricter than anyone should be with a child. He believed discipline was the only way to make Lucas strong. Sophia leaned forward, her heart pounding. What did he do? Clara? Clara's voice dropped, almost as if she were afraid Thomas might hear her. I remember one winter evening, Lucas accidentally spilled a bucket of water in the kitchen. Mr. Thomas made him stand outside in the freezing cold without a coat for an hour as punishment. I tried to bring him back in, but Mr. Thomas caught me. He said I was undermining his authority. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth in horror. That's cruel. Clara nodded solemnly. It wasn't the only time. One summer, Lucas broke a plate while helping me in the kitchen. Mr. Thomas made him kneel on the stone patio under the sun until his knees were raw. And there were times when the punishments were worse. Sophia's stomach churned. Worse? How could it be worse? Clara's voice broke slightly. Once, Lucas forgot to recite a lesson properly. Mr. Thomas tied a belt to the back of a chair and made him sit there for hours without moving. If he even flinched, Mr. Thomas would snap the belt on the table to scare him. Sophia felt tears welling in her eyes. Why didn't anyone stop him? Where was Lucas's mother? Clara hesitated. Mrs. Carter. She was kind, but she was afraid of him. She would try to intervene sometimes, but Mr. Thomas had a way of making her feel small, powerless, just like he's doing to you now. That evening, Sophia approached Lucas while he was reading in his study. She closed the door behind her and sat across from him, her expression serious. Lucas, we need to talk, she said. Lucas looked up, sensing the weight in her voice. What's wrong? Sophia hesitated, but then decided to be direct. Clara told me about your childhood, about what your father did to you. Lucas's face immediately darkened. He set his book down, leaning back in his chair. That was a long time ago, Sophia. That doesn't make it okay, Sophia replied firmly. You were just a child, Lucas. What he did to you, it was abuse. Lucas exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He thought he was making me strong. Was he? Sophia challenged. Or did he just make you afraid? Lucas's eyes darted away, unable to meet hers. Memories he had buried for years began to surface. The cold sting of the winter air on his skin, the sharp pain of kneeling on rough stones, the sound of the belt snapping against the table. All of it came rushing back. He thought he was doing what was best, Lucas said softly, more to himself than to Sophia. But he wasn't, Sophia said, her voice trembling with emotion. And now he's doing the same thing to Emma. Are you going to let it happen? Lucas's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. No, I won't let her go through what I did. That night, Lucas tucked Emma into bed. As he sat on the edge of her mattress, she clung to her stuffed bunny, her big, tear-filled eyes looking up at him. Daddy, she whispered, her voice shaking. Do I have to see Grandpa tomorrow? Lucas's chest tightened. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Why, sweetheart, what's wrong? Emma hesitated, her small fingers gripping the bunny tighter. He's scary. He gets mad at me, and he hurts my arm. Lucas felt his heart shatter. He pulled her into a hug, holding her close as tears filled his eyes. No one's going to hurt you anymore. Emma, I promise. The next morning, Lucas found Clara in the kitchen. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. Clara, Sophia told me what you said about my father. Is it true? All of it? Clara looked at him with sad eyes. Every word. Lucas, I tried to help you when I could, but I was afraid. Lucas nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. He used to tell me it was for my own good, that it was the only way I'd succeed. Clara placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You became the man you are today, not because of his punishments, Lucas, but in spite of them. That evening, Lucas sat with Sophia in the living room. "We can't let this go on," he said, his voice resolute. "Emma deserves better. She deserves to feel safe." Sophia nodded. "What should we do?" Lucas thought for a moment before replying. "We need proof. If we confront him without it, he'll just deny everything. We'll set up cameras. Let him expose himself." Sophia hesitated, but then agreed. "If that's what it takes to protect Emma, I'm in." As they worked together to discreetly place hidden cameras around the house, Lucas felt a mix of anger and determination. For years, he had been too afraid to stand up to his father. But now, for Emma's sake, he would find the strength to fight back. With the cameras in place, the Carters could only wait. But what the recordings would reveal would not only confirm their worst fears, but also ignite a confrontation that would tear their family apart. The tension in the Carter household had reached its breaking point. Lucas and Sophia knew they couldn't rely on words alone to protect Emma. They needed undeniable evidence of Thomas's behavior, proof that would silence his denials and force him to face the consequences of his actions. Sophia carefully positioned the hidden cameras around the house. One in the living room, where Thomas often interacted with Emma, another in the dining room, where most of the conflicts arose, and finally, one in the hallway near Emma's room, a place where Thomas's presence often unsettled her. Lucas double-checked the cameras before turning them on. "This has to work," he murmured, his voice heavy with resolve. Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder. "It will. For Emma's sake, it has to." That evening, as the snowstorm outside grew stronger, the family gathered in the living room. Emma sat quietly on the sofa, clutching her stuffed bunny. Thomas sat in his usual chair, his piercing gaze scanning the room. "Emma," Thomas said suddenly, his voice sharp, "bring me that book from the table." Emma froze, her tiny hands gripping the bunny tighter. I don't want to," she whispered. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? Did I just hear you say no?" Sophia immediately intervened. "Father, she's tired. Let her rest." Thomas shot her a withering glare. "This is exactly the problem. You're spoiling her. A child who doesn't obey grows up to be a failure." Before anyone could stop him, Thomas stood and grabbed Emma by the arm. She yelped in pain as he dragged her off the sofa. "You'll learn to listen," he said coldly. Sophia and Lucas sprang into action. "Let her go," Lucas shouted. Stepping between them, he pried Emma from Thomas's grip, cradling her trembling body. Thomas glared at his son, his voice filled with contempt. "You're weak, Lucas. That's why she's turning into this little brat." Sophia led Emma upstairs, whispering soothing words to calm her. Meanwhile, Lucas stood firm, staring his father down. "This ends now, Father." The next morning, Lucas and Sophia reviewed the footage from the cameras. As the video played, they watched in horror as Thomas's behavior unfolded with chilling clarity. One clip showed him gripping Emma's wrist so tightly that she winced in pain. Another captured him shouting inches from her face, berating her for spilling a glass of juice. "You're useless." His voice boomed. "Crying won't fix your mistakes." In one of the most damning clips, Thomas forced Emma to stand outside on the freezing porch as a punishment for accidentally tearing a page in a book. Her small frame shivered violently, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pleaded to come back inside. Sophia covered her mouth, tears spilling from her eyes. "How could he do this to her?" she whispered. Lucas clenched his fists, his face pale with anger. "He's not just hurting her physically, he's breaking her spirit." As they watched more footage, Lucas found himself drawn back into memories of his own childhood. He remembered the countless times his father had punished him for the smallest infractions, the long hours spent kneeling on rough floors, the fear of making a mistake, knowing it would be met with harsh words or worse. "Do you remember when I spilled that bucket of water?" "Clara?" Lucas asked quietly later that day, his voice trembling. Clara, standing nearby, nodded solemnly. I do. I'll never forget how cold it was that night. You were shaking, but he wouldn't let you come back inside. Lucas's expression hardened. I always said it was to make me stronger, but all it did was make me afraid of him. Clara placed a comforting hand on his arm. You have the chance to break this cycle. Lucas, protect Emma the way you wished someone had protected you. That evening, Lucas and Sophia decided it was time. They called Thomas into the living room, laptop in hand. Clara stood quietly in the corner, ready to support them if needed. Emma remained upstairs, safe in her room. Thomas entered, his usual air of authority filling the space. What's this about? He asked curtly. Lucas didn't waste time. He set the laptop on the coffee table and pressed play. The footage began to roll, filling the room with the sound of Thomas's voice and Emma's cries. At first, Thomas looked indifferent, but as the clips continued, his expression darkened. This is nonsense, he said, waving a hand dismissively. You're overreacting. Children need discipline. Lucas stood, his voice steady but firm. Discipline doesn't mean hurting her. It doesn't mean scaring her into submission. Sophia joined him, her eyes blazing with determination. She's 5 years old. Thomas, what you're doing isn't teaching, it's abuse. Thomas's face turned red with anger. Abuse? Don't be ridiculous. I raised you this way, Lucas, and you turned out fine. Lucas's voice cracked with emotion. Did I? Do you even know what it felt like to grow up under your roof? The fear, the pain, the constant feeling of never being good enough. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but Lucas didn't let him. You didn't make me strong, Father. You made me scared, and now you're doing the same to Emma. I won't let it happen. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. You think you're better than me? You think you can tell me how to raise my granddaughter? Without me, you'd be nothing. Sophia stepped forward, her voice unwavering. We're not children anymore. Thomas, you can't intimidate us. We won't let you hurt Emma. Thomas turned to Clara, his voice dripping with disdain. And you? Are you siding with them too? Clara met his gaze calmly. Yes, I've seen enough. Mr. Thomas, I stayed silent for too long, but no more. You need to stop. After Thomas stormed out of the room, Lucas and Sophia sat in silence for a moment. Then Lucas spoke. This isn't enough. He'll just keep denying it. Sophia nodded. We need to report this, for Emma's safety and for the truth. Lucas picked up his phone and dialed 911. Hello, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I need to report a case of child abuse. I have evidence, and I need help. As he hung up, he turned to Sophia. It's time to end this. Sophia squeezed his hand. For Emma. The next evening, the Carter household was silent. Heavy with anticipation, Lucas and Sophia had called for a family meeting, summoning Thomas, Lucas's sister Emily, and his niece Gabriella. Clara, the housekeeper, stood in the corner, her presence a quiet but strong support. Upstairs, Emma slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing below. As the family gathered in the living room, Thomas sat in his usual chair, his posture rigid and defiant. Lucas stood near the fireplace, laptop in hand, while Sophia sat nearby, her expression both determined and wary. What is this all about? Thomas demanded, his sharp tone cutting through the tension in the room. Lucas took a deep breath. We need to talk, Father, about your behavior, about what you've done to Emma. Thomas's eyes narrowed. This again? I've already explained. She needs discipline. You're both too soft on her. Lucas shook his head. This isn't about discipline. Father, it's about abuse. Without another word, Lucas placed the laptop on the coffee table and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Thomas's voice, harsh and unforgiving, as the video showed him grabbing Emma by the wrist, dragging her across the room, and yelling inches from her tear-streaked face. Emily gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Gabriella, sitting beside her, looked away, her eyes filled with tears. What is this? Thomas barked, his face turning red. It's the truth, Lucas said firmly. You've crossed the line, Father. You're hurting Emma, and we won't stand for it anymore. Thomas leaned forward in his chair, his voice rising. This is ridiculous. You're spying on me now? I raised you. Lucas, I made you the man you are today. And this is how you repay me? Lucas's voice cracked with emotion. You didn't raise me. Father, you broke me. And now you're trying to do the same to my daughter. The room fell silent as Emily stood, her hands trembling. He's right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas turned to her, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? Emily took a shaky breath. When I was a little girl, you did the same to me. I remember the nights you made me kneel on the cold floor for hours because I didn't finish my homework. I remember the times you slapped me for crying. Thomas's face twisted in anger. That was discipline. It made you stronger. No, Emily said, her voice growing louder. It made me afraid of you. Even now, I still have nightmares about those punishments. Gabriella, sitting beside her, placed a hand on her mother's arm. You weren't just strict with her. Grandpa, you did it to me too. Thomas's eyes darted to his granddaughter. What are you talking about? Gabriella's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched into fists. Do you remember the time I spilled juice on your favorite chair? You made me stand outside in the rain for 30 minutes. I was 8 years old, and I caught a cold that lasted for weeks. Lucas stepped closer to his father, his voice shaking with anger. Do you see? Father? This isn't discipline. It's cruelty. You've hurt everyone in this family, and we've all been too scared to stand up to you. But not anymore. Thomas rose from his chair, towering over Lucas. You ungrateful little. Everything I did was for you. For this family. Without me, you'd all be nothing. Lucas didn't back down. We'd rather be nothing than live in fear of you. Clara, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her voice was calm but filled with conviction. Mr. Carter, I've served this family for decades. I've seen the way you've treated your children and grandchildren. I stayed quiet for too long, but no more. This needs to stop. Thomas glared at her. You have no right. I have every right. Clara interrupted. I was there when you made Lucas stand outside in the snow for spilling water. I was there when you forced Emily to kneel for hours. And now I see you doing the same to Emma. Enough is enough. Thomas's face turned red with fury. He slammed his fist on the coffee table, his voice booming. You're all against me. After everything I've done for this family, you dare to accuse me of abuse? You don't know what real hardship is. You're all soft, weak, ungrateful. Lucas stood firm. And you're blind to the damage you've caused. It ends here. Father, we've already called the police. Thomas froze, his eyes widening. You? What? Sophia stepped forward, her voice unwavering. We reported everything. The videos, the bruises on Emma's arms, Clara's testimony. It's all with the authorities now. The sound of a car pulling up outside broke the tense silence. 2 police officers entered the house moments later, their presence commanding. Mr. Thomas Carter, one officer said, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding allegations of child abuse. Thomas turned to his family, his face a mixture of anger and betrayal. You'll regret this. All of you. No, Lucas said quietly, his voice steady. We're doing what's right for Emma, for all of us. As the officers escorted Thomas out of the house, the room was filled with a heavy silence. Emily and Gabriella hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Clara stood beside Lucas and Sophia, her hand resting gently on Sophia's shoulder. You did the right thing, Clara said softly. Lucas nodded, though his eyes were filled with pain. I just hope it's enough to protect Emma. Sophia took his hand, squeezing it. It will be. We're finally standing up to him. That's what matters. The arrest of Thomas Carter sent shockwaves through the family. The once dominant patriarch, now in police custody, was forced to face the consequences of his actions. For Lucas, Sophia, and the rest of the Carter family, it was the beginning of a painful but necessary reckoning. A week after his arrest, Thomas was charged with multiple counts of child abuse, with Emma's case at the forefront. The police had reviewed the video evidence and Clara's testimony, deeming it sufficient to press charges. Lucas and Sophia sat in a conference room at the police station, going over the details with their assigned officer. Officer Daniels, a composed woman in her 40s, explained the process. "The evidence is strong," she said, gesturing to the folder on the table. "The videos, the bruises, and the testimonies paint a clear picture. But Mr. Carter is denying everything. He claims he was simply disciplining his granddaughter and that the family is exaggerating." Lucas clenched his jaw. He's always found a way to justify his actions. But this time, he can't hide behind his excuses. Sophia placed a comforting hand on his arm. "We have to stay strong, Lucas." For Emma, while the legal proceedings began, Sophia focused on Emma's emotional recovery. She arranged for Emma to meet with a child psychologist, Dr. Harper, who specialized in trauma. In their first session, Dr. Harper sat on the floor with Emma, using toys and drawings to create a safe space. "Emma," she said gently, "can you tell me how you've been feeling?" Emma hesitated, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Scared," she whispered. "Scared of what?" "Sweetheart." "Grandpa," Emma said, her voice trembling. "He gets mad, and he hurts my arm. I don't want to see him anymore." "But," Harper nodded, her expression calm but empathetic. "It's okay. Emma, you're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore." Sophia watched from the other side of the room, tears welling in her eyes. Dr. Harper's reassurance felt like the first step toward healing, not just for Emma, but for their entire family. Thomas's case gained more traction when Gabriella and Emily came forward with their own testimonies. They shared their stories of mistreatment, adding weight to the allegations against him. "I stayed quiet for so long," Emily admitted during a family meeting. "I thought it was normal, that maybe I deserved it, but now I see it wasn't discipline, it was abuse." Gabriella nodded. "I want Emma to know she's not alone. And I want Grandpa to know he can't get away with this anymore." Their courage inspired the rest of the family, uniting them in their fight for justice. The day of Thomas's court hearing arrived, bringing a mix of anxiety and relief to the Carter family. Lucas, Sophia, Emily, and Gabriella sat together in the courtroom, their presence a silent but powerful statement of solidarity. Thomas entered, escorted by officers. His once commanding demeanor was now overshadowed by a quiet defiance. He refused to meet his family's eyes as the charges were read aloud. The prosecution played the videos of Thomas's interactions with Emma, and the courtroom fell silent, the images and sounds speaking volumes. The judge's stern expression reflected the gravity of the situation. When it was Thomas's turn to speak, he maintained his denial. "I didn't abuse anyone," he said, his voice firm. "I disciplined my family the way I was taught. They're turning against me because they can't handle the truth about how life works." The prosecutor responded with conviction. "Discipline is not an excuse for inflicting fear, pain, and emotional trauma. The evidence shows a clear pattern of abusive behavior, not just toward Emma, but toward other members of the Carter family. This is not discipline, it is harm." After days of testimonies and evidence presentation, the judge delivered the verdict. Thomas was found guilty on multiple counts of child abuse and sentenced to 5 years in prison, along with mandatory counseling. Lucas felt a mix of emotions, relief that justice had been served, but also a deep sadness for the man his father had become. With Thomas behind bars, the Carter family began the long process of healing. Emma's therapy sessions continued, and she gradually regained her confidence. Her laughter returned, filling the house with warmth that had been missing for so long. Sophia and Lucas also sought counseling to address the scars left by Thomas's actions. For Lucas, it was a chance to confront the pain of his childhood and break free from its grip. Clara, ever the steady presence, became an even more integral part of the family. "You're all stronger than you realize," she told Lucas and Sophia one evening. "This family has been through so much, but you've chosen to fight for each other. That's what matters." Emily and Gabriella also found healing in their own ways. Emily started journaling about her experiences, channeling her pain into words that helped her process her past. Gabriella joined a support group for survivors of family trauma, finding strength in sharing her story with others. "This is the first time I've felt like I can breathe," Emily said during one of their family gatherings. "We're not hiding anymore." Meanwhile, in prison, Thomas faced the consequences of his actions. The mandatory counseling sessions forced him to confront his behavior and its impact on his family. During one session, the counselor asked, "Do you understand why you're here, Mr. Carter?" Thomas hesitated before finally responding, "I thought I was doing what was best for them. But maybe I was wrong." It was the first crack in his armor, a small step toward accountability. Months later, the Carter family gathered in the backyard for a small celebration. Emma, now brimming with confidence, played happily with her cousins. Lucas and Sophia watched her from a distance, their hands intertwined. "We did it," Sophia said softly. Lucas nodded. "For Emma, and for us," as the sun set. The family stood together, a symbol of resilience and hope. They had faced their darkest truths and emerged stronger, united by their love and determination to protect one another. Months after Thomas's sentencing, the Carter family found themselves in a new phase of their journey, not one of conflict, but of healing. The wounds Thomas had inflicted, both physical and emotional, would take time to mend, but the family was determined to rebuild the trust and love they had long been denied. In prison, Thomas had little to do but reflect on his actions. The mandatory counseling sessions forced him to confront the reality he had long denied. His counselor, a firm but empathetic man named Dr. Collins, encouraged him to explore his childhood and how it had shaped his behavior. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Collins said during one session, "you've justified your actions as discipline. But discipline isn't about breaking someone's spirit. It's about guidance. Do you understand the difference?" Thomas hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. I thought I was making them stronger. I didn't want them to fail like I did when I was younger." "Dr. Collins leaned forward. "And do you believe your methods achieve that? Look at where you are now. Look at how your family views you." Thomas's silence spoke volumes. For the first time, he began to see the depth of the pain he had caused. He remembered Lucas's trembling voice as he described his fear. He remembered Emma's tears and the bruises on her tiny arms. The memories haunted him. "In a rare moment of vulnerability," Thomas admitted, "I didn't mean to hurt them. I thought I was protecting them." Dr. Collins nodded. "Understanding the harm you've done is the first step. The next is taking responsibility." Meanwhile, back at home, Emma was blossoming. Her therapy sessions with Dr. Harper had given her a safe space to express her feelings and rebuild her confidence. During one session, Emma proudly showed Dr. Harper a picture she had drawn of her family. "That's Mommy and Daddy," she explained, pointing to the figures. "And that's me. I'm smiling because I feel safe now." Sophia, who sat nearby, felt her heart swell with gratitude. She had feared that Thomas's actions would leave lasting scars on Emma. But her daughter's resilience gave her hope. At home, Emma began laughing again, her fear of her grandfather no longer consuming her thoughts. She played freely with her cousins, her joy contagious to everyone around her. For Lucas, the journey toward healing was more complex. Confronting his father had reopened old wounds, forcing him to relive memories he had buried for decades. But with Sophia's unwavering support, he began to address his past. During a late-night conversation, Lucas confided in Sophia. "I used to think that what my father did to me was normal," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "that it was just the way fathers raise their sons. But now I see it for what it was, abuse." Sophia held his hand tightly. "And you broke the cycle, Lucas? You stood up for Emma when it mattered most." Lucas nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "I just want her to grow up knowing she's loved, not afraid." One afternoon, a letter arrived at the Carter household. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unmistakably Thomas's. Lucas hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. Inside, the letter read, "Dear Lucas, I've had a lot of time to think about what I've done. I know I've hurt you, and I've hurt Emma. For a long time, I believed I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I was wrong. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry. I hope one day you and your family can find peace." Father Lucas read the letter in silence, his emotions a mix of anger, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. He showed the letter to Sophia, who said gently, "Maybe this is his way of trying to make amends." The Carter family gathered for a small celebration in their backyard to mark Emma's birthday. The laughter of children filled the air as Emma ran around with her cousins, her joy lighting up the entire yard. Emily approached Lucas, holding a cup of tea. "It feels different now, doesn't it?" she said. Lucas nodded. "For the first time in a long time, it feels like we're free." Gabriella joined them, smiling. "We've come a long way. I'm proud of us." Clara, who had been quietly observing from the patio, chimed in. "This family has been through so much. But look at you all now. You're stronger because you chose to stand together." As the evening drew to a close, Lucas and Sophia sat on the porch, watching Emma chase fireflies in the fading light. Lucas took Sophia's hand, his voice filled with gratitude. "We've come so far. Emma's happy. We're healing. And for the first time, I feel like we're building something better." Sophia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "It wasn't easy, but we did it. For Emma, for us, and for the family." The night ended with the family gathered around a fire pit, sharing stories and laughter. The shadows of the past still lingered, but the light of love and hope burned brighter. The Carter family's journey was far from perfect, but it was a testament to the power of love, accountability, and resilience. They had faced their darkest truths, broken the cycle of abuse, and emerged stronger together. If this story has inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to share meaningful stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.